today is our presentation on Know Your Rights. So Sierra and Joshua.
Hey, thank you,
Anyway.
Ben. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. I'm hoping this will work well so everybody can see. And of course, when I maximize it, the little present button goes, there we are. All right. Well, I want to say thank you again, everyone, for welcoming us into your space. As a neighbor in particular, a relatively new neighbor, I'm really glad to be here, and it's fun to dig into your website and learn about some of the D10 initiatives too. So we're going to be sharing some basic information with you all tonight. Folks that everyone in our community should know about your rights here in St. Paul. So we're with the Department of Human Rights and Equal Economic Opportunity. That's kind of a mouthful. So you may have heard us by the acronym HREEO as well. So tonight we're going to be talking about the St. Paul Human Rights Ordinance, labor standards ordinances, and what our department does to enforce those ordinances. Accessible services, how folks can file complaints regarding police misconduct, and some info on doing business with the city of St. Paul. At the bottom here, I like to flag that accommodations and language services are available upon request for all programs. Now that's true for any city of St. Paul service, but the coordinator, the accessibility coordinator is in our department. So something I always like to share. Our jurisdiction is the city of St. Paul. So we're here tonight in District 10, but folks live and work all over the city. Our director likes to say, whether you live, work, or play in St. Paul, these ordinances offer protections for you. For folks who aren't sure if a location is directly in the city, sometimes there are those border cases with Roseville. Sometimes Google will show St. Paul, but it's actually Eden Prairie. We have this word district locator tool that you can go and plug an address into and see if it's in the city or just out. So St. Paul has a human rights ordinance, and it's one of the strongest human rights laws in the state of Minnesota. So these are all of the different protected classes that are included in the ordinance. I was chatting with a colleague from Hawaii today, and he was like, wait, all of these are in your ordinance. It's pretty rare to see this many protected classes. So if anyone is discriminated against, they can call our office, speak to one of our human rights investigators, and the human rights investigator will look at the protected class, they'll look at the area the discrimination happened in, and then they will look for a negative action that they can tie the dots back to being a member of that protected class.
Good question.
Yeah.
How do you define creed?
That is a great question. I am not a human rights investigator, and I don't have that definition off the back of my mind. I'm sorry about that. That's a good question, because you're right that it distinguishes between religion and creed. Those are separate boxes. Right. I'm going to have to look into that one for you. I'm sorry, Dan. Yes. So also want to note here that there's this 1-year statute of limitations. So if you or someone you know believes they may have been discriminated against, call us as soon as possible to start working with one of their investigators, because you don't want to wait and have that statute of limitations pass, and then we're not able to open an investigation. So call us right away. For example, I had a lady call me just a few weeks ago who said, hey, my landlord raised my rent because I had a child. And that's illegal. You can't do that. It's discriminatory. And so I referred her to one of our colleagues, and they opened an investigation. We do also have federal contracts with the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, as well as the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. And so we will sometimes cross-file cases. So they're investigated by both agencies under the St. Paul ordinance, as well as those federal law protections too. And I'll turn it to my labor standards expert.
All right, Joshua here again, and so I'll talk a little bit about the labor standards ordinances that we have in the city of St. Paul. And just like before getting questions, just jump in, be happy to talk right here. But we enforce right now 2 ordinances in particular. So our minimum wage ordinance and our earned sick and safe time ordinance. And if we could flip to that next slide, please. And so in particular, I like to emphasize for our earned sick and safe time ordinance, as we call it, is that it's not just sick time. I think a lot of people are familiar with sick time. Hopefully a lot of employers already give out sick time, but our ordinance covers a lot more. So for example, and in particular, I want to emphasize safe time. So under our ordinance, employers should be allowing employees time off for absence that says due to domestic abuse, sexual assault, or stalking. And so that's defined under the Minnesota statutes. I don't know the exact definitions off the top of my head, but that's according to Minnesota state definitions. And so if people are having issues, that could be not just the incident itself, but say if they need to go to a domestic abuse hearing, protective order hearing, anything like that's also covered as well. So I always like to emphasize that. A lot of people know sick time, but not necessarily safe time. Now, also there's places in our ordinance covered under what's called closure place of business or closure place of care. So closure place of care is kind of what it sounds like. So for example, if your child gets sick, if if their daycare is closed due to whatever reason, maybe COVID is sweeping through the place, then that would be a reason to take an hour or more underneath our ordinance. Now, with that said, I do want to then also just briefly mention that we're working on aligning our ESST ordinance with the new state sick time law, the new state ESST law. So if you all have not heard, there will be a new Minnesota state law taking effect on January 1st, 2024. And so we're trying to align our ordinance with the state law. Now, with that said, the state law was essentially based off our ordinance. So we're pretty proud of that. It started off very strong. We're going to make it simply stronger and align it with the Minnesota state law. They made a few clarifications in there to make things a little bit better for employees and employers as well.
What does the city have to do to align it? You get it lined up, but then do you have to put it before the council, or how does it get approved?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I believe it is, let's say it's the 17th. I believe tomorrow we actually have our final adoption round at city council for the actual alignment. So our city attorney's office, in coordination with our department, have gone through, looked at what the differences are between our ordinance and the state law, and then presented that to the mayor, and then also talked to the city council about that. So like I said, I believe the final adoption round is tomorrow through city council, so that should be taking effect January 1st, I believe. And so that'll be ready to go once the state law takes effect. So that way there won't be any, crisscrossing with, is it the state law, is it the city law, what's so hope that answers your question.
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah.
So from a practical standpoint, a lot of people have vacation time, sick time. So if they take some of this, they could basically use this and tap into their sick time?
Yeah.
For this purpose, is that what you're really saying? Okay.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Yes and no, and also it depends. And by that, I mean, so an employer might just have, say, just a restaurant might just have a sick time policy, might just have an ESST policy and no vacation time. But then say a corporation, their corporation might have a vacation policy time and a sick time policy. And as long as it meets our basic minimum requirements under our ordinance, then that's okay. It's okay if it's called paid leave, paid time off, as long as that also comports with what our basic minimum standards are in the ordinance.
If an employer does not provide sick time or vacation time, do they have to provide this unpaid then?
See, if it runs out of sick time?
Well, run out is one, or if they don't offer any of those things, but I have like an absence due to domestic abuse. Am I can they fire me, or or do you get it, just unpaid, or do they have to acknowledge it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll break that down into two answers. So number one, if they don't have a sick time or ESST policy in the first place, so that's against our ordinance. And if that comes to our attention, we can and will open an investigation into an employer. And so, for example, I just had an employee a while back give me a call and say, we don't get sick time at all. We get maybe an unpaid day off for a birthday. That's a no-no. Underneath our ordinance, they need to be allowed sometimes a week up to 80 hours for sick time, depending on circumstances, they have 0. And so we open an investigation into that business.
Is there a size requirement of that business, like 25 employees or something like that? Less than 25, it doesn't
Mhm.
apply, more than 25, it does?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for example, our minimum wage ordinance is broken down by size of businesses, and we can see that on slide here in a bit. But our sick time law isn't necessarily broken down like that, so it's not as if there's 10,000 employees, you get more or less sick time than what we have in the first year. I'm talking about the current ordinance, not the
Right.
upcoming one, that then you should at least start accruing right away at the commencement of employment up to 48 hours, and then including carryover time in that second year employment up to 80 hours of the SSP.
1 employee or more.
Okay,
Yeah, so just,
Yep.
thank you, yeah. So yeah, just to be clear, yeah, 1 employee more. So,
Are there, when these investigations open for into businesses, are there often like punitive actions taken that result in fines and that sort of thing? Or is it more of a warning based system where you're saying, you have to develop this, we'll get back in a few months kind of thing? So businesses aren't necessarily like punished out of the gate for not having these things, but there's like a system to sort of incentivize them to doing it.
that's a good question. So we always try to get to, people and employers before that even happens, but if it does reach that level, then what we'll do is, in the course of our investigation, if we think it's possible, if we think it's necessary, what we'll try to go into what's called a predetermination settlement. And what that means is before you even get to something like say administrative fines or making a determination, as we call it, we try to essentially enter into a predetermination settlement agreement, is what we call it. It's essentially a contract between the city and the employer to say, okay, the employer, are going to carry out these steps, fix the policy, and if back pay is needed, meaning no sick time hours being given out, we will then put that back pay, those back pay numbers into the contract, and that way there's no question that it's legally binding. If you don't do it, our city attorney's office can't enforce that contract at the end of the day. And I put the numbers off the top of my head. Was it 65,000 recently? I can't remember how much we recovered recently, but
For employees.
for employees.
All
Yeah.
employees, not a dollar goes to the city.
Yeah, nothing goes to.
Wait, is there like an amount time, like a required minimum amount, like people have, like say an employer provides 3 weeks of vacation and sick combined at paid time off. Is that sufficient, like, someone can come in and say, I need a month off because of absence due to domestic abuse, you have to pay me for a month? Or do they have, so what's the little bit?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have those minimum hours, I just mentioned the 48 and 80 hours in our ordinance, but nothing in our ordinance is against being more generous. So.
Right, but you have a required minimum that they have to go, okay.
Right, yeah, exactly. So if they don't meet that minimum, whatever they call it ESST or sick time or paid time off policy, as long as it meets the minimum requirements, then they're okay underneath our ordinance. But yeah, if they want to be more generous, then
Right.
certainly allowed as well.
Yeah, something we would see sometimes. I used to be a labor standards investigator. I am very passionate about this too, but somebody has that combined vacation and sick, it complies with the terms of the ordinance, but they use all that time on vacation. Well, the employer has complied with their requirements. They're not required to give additional time beyond those minimums. So that's a good question.
There was-
And
Sorry. There was a question in the chat. Just want to make sure we got to it. Jay popped in. Actually, pretty interesting wrinkle. With the amount of remote work, is this ordinance based on where the employer is headquartered or where the employee is working from?
yeah, that's a good one. So the size is the business is dependent on the business and its totality. So if we have random mega corporation based out of Seattle or something to that effect, and they have an office in St. Paul, it doesn't mean that just because they only have 10 employees in St. Paul, that we won't count them as a 10 or 10 employees in total. With that said, we do have a few exceptions for restaurants that I wanted to get.
I think it might be one step ahead with minimum wage. Josh.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Um,
Okay, my bad, everyone. My bad.
Yeah, so, earn sick and safe time applies to folks who are working within the city of St. Paul.
Mhm.
So I work from home a lot. If my employer were based in New York, if I'm doing my work in St. Paul, I'm covered by these ordinances.
So this applies to me directly. My office is in Minneapolis.
Yes.
I go there 2 or 3 times a week. I work from home 2 or 3 times a week. Does it apply to me sometimes, always, never? And the main office is here.
Yeah.
They're allowing employees to work from home.
Yeah.
And so by doing it, it's now all of a sudden it's kicking a thing.
Yeah, there's some nitty gritty, like once you work a number of hours within the city of St. Paul, they're required to provide you with an available balance of earned sick and safe time. And if you want to get even nittier grittier, it also says you can only use your available time for hours you're scheduled to work in St. Paul. It gets sticky with all these different cities, right? And that's why we're so excited to see it coming statewide. It's gonna make it so much easier for employers.
Yeah, because for me, I don't have like a set schedule.
Sure.
This week I'll, Wednesday, Thursday, out in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Next week it could be Monday, Tuesday. It's really up to me. The employer leaves it up to me when works for me to work from home or in Minneapolis. So.
And that gets confusing, because Minneapolis has their own
It
ordinance,
does.
and then it goes, yeah.
Well, yeah, okay.
Um,
So we don't have to go down that rabbit.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's-
One other reminder, rabbit hole, is there a minimum hours, like if you only work 15 hours a week for a company? Does this apply, or you have to work 30+ hours a week for it to apply?
So in general, it applies to full-time, part-time, and temporary employees. You have to work up to, correct me if I'm wrong, 80 hours in a year at an employer for it to apply. So we have that basically, but it doesn't matter if you're full-time or part-time or temporary.
I bet you want to get on with your side.
I know you have a lot to do,
Yeah.
so we'll get through these last, but I love the conversation. To me,
Yeah,
that's the best
exactly.
part of these presentations, so thank you.
And I won't belabor minimum wage. These are the current 2024 rates on the screen. If you have any questions about that, then feel free to jump in, but those rates on the screen, I know I've already taken up enough of your time, so.
Like you were able to cover all your stuff.
Yes, yeah. So that was my thing.
I do have a question about human rights
Yes,
and the reporting. So if an employer has an EOAA or whatever they call it, there's a million different names for that. Can an employee go right to the city, or do they have to first go through their employer, the St. Paul employer?
yeah, so if anyone believes that their rights under the Human Rights Ordinance are being violated, they're welcome to contact us at any time. We're not lawyers, we can't represent you in court, we're a neutral fact-finding third party. But that's certainly something we could look into. Yeah. All right, and I'll also give you all our email addresses too, in case you have more questions later. So as I mentioned, accessibility coordinator, also works in HREEO. They work across the whole city, striving to make things as accessible as possible. Digital spaces are increasingly important, as we all know. And so our accessibility coordinator works to ensure the translate functions on our website are working well, that things are readable by screen readers, and so on. All right. So I hope nobody ever has a negative experience with the police, but if you have an experience with a St. Paul police officer that doesn't meet your expectations for our St. Paul Police Department, you can file a complaint. And you can file a complaint with the HREEO department, in person, on mail, by the mail, online. It just can't be over the phone, because there's a state law requirement that there be a formal signature. This is my program, and so you can certainly call me. We can work directly together to file a complaint. So the Human Rights Department does intake for these complaints. Internal Affairs is the investigating body. And the reason that complaints can be filed with the HREEO department is that the PCIARC is housed in the HREEO department. The PCIARC, or the Police Civilian Internal Affairs Review Commission, is one of the city's boards and commissions. It's made of 9 of our St. Paul neighbors. So Internal Affairs does their investigation, they compile all the video evidence, all of the documents. It's usually dozens of pages and several hours of footage. The civilians then get together and they deliberate the case and they issue recommendations to Chief Henry on whether the complaint should be sustained and discipline should be implemented, or if not. And they also make policy recommendations to Chief Henry as well. All right, and we chatted a little bit about this too. The CERT program is housed in the HREEO department. All purchasing for the city of St. Paul, whether Como Zoo needs a new giraffe or Public Works needs some more grade 5 to pave our roads, all that purchasing goes through the HREEO department. If you or someone you know is a small local business owner, I really encourage you to get in contact with our CERT program.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I small women, so tall women can't. I know that wasn't.
That's a government joke, I like it. Yes, small business enterprises, women owned or BIPOC owned, you're absolutely right. Very reasonable.
Well, and I read on the left side had the appropriate comma, I'm not an English major, but then I did anyway. English. That's small.
You're gilding the lily.
So my last slide here is an invitation to you all. So the city of St. Paul has several boards and commissions. These 5 are near and dear to us. They're all housed in the HREEO department. I've told you a little bit about the PCIARC, but there are 4 other wonderful groups. We're all currently looking for members, so please join us. We'd love to work with you. We'd love to get your insight to what we're doing in HREEO and work together to make things even better. So here are some phone numbers and email addresses for some of those direct contacts. I'll also send a copy of this PowerPoint. You're welcome to share it out with members if you'd like, whatever works best. Is this question in the chat a new one? Oh, no. Okay. Great. Does anyone else have any questions for us?
Back to the slide before, how many people are typically on each of those boards?
Yeah, so it varies. The Human Rights and Equal Economic Opportunities about 25. Police, the PCIARC is capped at 9. We currently have 8. Thank you, City Council, for just seating another one. Labor Standards Advisory is 16, I believe. Advisory Committee on Aging is about a dozen, and that's the same with the Mayor's Advisory Committee.
And how often do they meet? How, I'm sure you have to apply to get on it, and they're all volunteer positions within the city.
Largely, the PCIARC, there is a very small stipend per month, but yes, the applications are online. They're open to everybody. Each of these groups meets once per month.
If anybody's interested, you can reach out to me and I'll get you connected with the right person.
Please do.
Are they in person or online?
So when we are discussing data that's not publicly available, those are closed meetings that are entirely in person. We do have some hybrid options, and at least 3 of these committees have options for you to stream a meeting online if you just want to watch as a member of the public. Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Really grateful again for the opportunity to get to speak with you all. And I will see you out in Como. Please don't stop. Please do stop and say hello.